see. Hopefully this is a little bit better, or at least let's turn that off because you can hear what I can see on the stream. So yeah, today we're going to get a bit deeper into, so last week we touched on the Veeam Data Labs and how that's the umbrella marketing term for lots of different features within Veeam Backup Replication. Craig, are you not hearing my... okay. So hopefully audio good. Let's just have a... Can I get a yes if the audio is good? It should be working from my end. Yes, cool. Cheers, Al. Right, yeah, so today we're going to be focusing in on that SureBackup piece, so that verified recoverability. If Nathan, it's because you're all the way down in Australia, mate. That's why it's so quiet. Just turn it up. Okay, I can look at the gain. Maybe just bring it. Yeah. Okay, let's go with it. Let's see how we go. Okay, so yeah, SureBackup, the ability to verify or automate the verification of your backup. So what we want to do is actually, rather than just spending the time going through slides, we want to actually touch on the components that allow you to do that. So there's 3 key components that we're going to touch on. Virtual Lab, we're going to touch on application groups, as well as then the actual SureBackup job. Now within Veeam Backup Replication, if you have not set up a virtual lab, you will not have this SureBackup job icon up the top here in the ribbon. That's generally the first place that people then switch off and then potentially don't even go and start that's generally the first point of where people just turn away and don't look at this ability to leverage and automate the testing of your backup. So what we're going to start with is down in backup infrastructure, you've got your virtual labs. Now I've set up a couple here just for various different testing. So, and we're going to run through what they are, what they mean, and try and uncover some of the either misconceptions or potentially the issues that people face when they come to creating these virtual labs. In particular, I want to focus on this. This is a nested environment that we've got. We're going to touch on 3 different options within there. And yeah, let's get into it. So if we take this first one, for example, I've just called it Virtual Lab 1. This was really to get up and running. And this is generally where I see the majority of customers wanting to experience, like to get into the SureBackup or data labs type experience. So again, just purely a very wizard driven approach. We're going to choose which host this lives on. So you can see here, you can also, if we were setting this up, we can also set the resource pool and folder. Now, generally people just go, oh, give it a name, give it the host, next. Obviously, if you're in, especially if you're in a shared lab environment, look at this. This can be the same names of resource pools that you have existing in your environment. It is a word, so in fact, let's just quickly do that. So if I go add virtual lab, I say virtual lab 4. Here, it's just a text. But if your lab is called lab environment or TPM04 underscore lab, and you type in here TPM04 underscore lab, it will use that dedicated resource pool that you have within your environment, as well as the same folder. So just because it's text-based and there's no option to go and choose, this won't go and create a duplicate, or it won't fail when it goes and creates a duplicate. It won't. It will recognize that that folder or resource pool is there and use that accordingly. Okay. Maybe a rant over. The so then with the virtual lab, so again we get in there and we look at the host where we are, and then we've got the ability to any change blocks. Now this is more relevant if you are going to be writing data into that, more relevant to sandbox environments. So if you're going to give a SQL box to a DBA or a web server to your web developers, there's going to be changes. Now them changes are not going to be written to the actual backup file. Those are going to be in state, then read only. We're just leveraging them for what they are. What this gives us the ability, if you don't turn this off, we will use the vPower cache of the backup repository to store changes. If you want to put that onto a data store, so a data store that's within the same environment that you're pushing it to, then this is the option to go and do that. It's completely optional. You can see from the text, it tells you that there. Then this is the proxy appliance. Now this proxy is the bridge between the production network, so where your VBR server is, or we'll get into a little bit more about the confusing matter of this, because I think everyone, at least everyone on the live stream, will understand what I'm saying here. But this proxy is basically the NAT-in device or the router that allows production to speak to the isolated environment, and that's it. That's a one-way streak, and we'll get into what that means. So this could be DHCP, this could be static IP address. So my subnet is 10.0.40.165. You can see the settings there, and you can also then see the production network. So Veeam network, we go and choose where that production network is going to be. So where do your live systems, your VBR server, where do they live in terms of live production environment? So again, we run through that. We give it the relevant information that it needs. If you are proxying or need to proxy your internet connectivity, then we can do that. We could put that proxy in here as well. And then this is where probably 99% of people that have got this far will be like, what the hell do I do now? Because if you don't just have a flat network, which again, 99% of you probably don't, is that first option, which seems like the easiest option because it's really just going to go and send and create something that should just work. And if it's a flat network, it absolutely will. We can make that work. But and again, I'll run through what that looks like. I think if I change this one, it will get rid of all my pre-configured. So we'll come back to that. But basically, basic single host is that it's going to go and deploy that virtual lab proxy appliance in that resource pool that you've defined, and that's it. It's going to assume that your VBR server is on that same production network. It's going to then give you that isolated environment. Now, anything that deviates off that, so non-flat networks, for example, then you want to click that middle one or the bottom one. And I'm going to come back to the bottom one because I imagine, again, a very large percentage of people shy away from that because it potentially looks and sounds confusing. So let's go advanced single host. Now, yes, this does mean that everything that we do within our SureBackup job is going to reside on one host. So you need to make sure that you've got all of the resources that allow us to boot up all of those machines, the CPU, the memory. Don't worry about the storage. That's coming from the backup storage. So we don't have to worry about the storage. But we need to make sure that we've got the compute power. If your application group, which we'll get into, expands more than one host, let's say you've got 100 machines, then that's going to need to go over multiple hosts. That's where the use of a distributed virtual switch comes in, and we'll, again, like I say, we'll touch on that shortly. So what I'm also going to suggest here is that I've taken the backup from one vSphere environment, and I am okay, I'll stop there then. Let me make sure that why you can't see the screen. Maybe that fixes it. Craig, can you give me a thumbs up if that's all good? Okay, right. Sorry guys. Hopefully that's the pretty simple stuff, but just for argument's sake, so that we could go back in the video and people that aren't on the live stream, simply put, we're going to run. So again, let's just go back. So I mentioned around this being up in the ribbon. That's only applicable when you've got a virtual lab actually in your configuration. Then we jump down to backup infrastructure, and we're going to take one that we already have. And what we'll do very quickly. Yeah, sorry guys. So again, we've got our name, we've got our host. This is where I was talking about the resource pool and the folder, and that you can change that so it matches with your lab environment. Then here you've got your data store for those write cache. Now, if you don't choose to use this, this is going to use the vPower NFS. This is going to use the backup repository vcache location to store those changes that you potentially write to those systems. This is the Proxy Appliance. One thing to mention here is that when you're picking your production network, make sure that it is the production network. Generally, it's going to be, or hopefully it's going to be, where your VBR server is, your Veeam Backup Replication server. And then we got to this page. So this is, I'll spend a little bit more time just going through this again, hopefully. So what I said about basic was this is going to remove, if I was to click that right now, in fact, let's do it and I'll just come back into it. But you saw that list down the left-hand side completely shrink. And literally what we've done so far will then be deployed as a virtual appliance in our vSphere environment. And providing you've got that production network in a good place, then everything will work. Like if you've got a very simple networking environment, that will work. Again, it's based on one single host. So you need to have the resources to be able to manage that on one single host. If we go back to this, and I believe it will have, oh no, okay, we're good. So then we get to advanced single host, and this is where I would almost say everyone, especially if you're watching this, you're obviously interested in this. This is where I would say the majority of people will be looking to use from a virtual lab perspective. Then the bottom one, I'm going to touch on that in a little bit more. I've got a distributed switch all set up as well. And that means that we can span over multiple hosts. So then we get, obviously you saw down this left-hand side, a lot more opened up. So isolated networks. Now, I'm only using one virtual machine in this purely for walking through and just proving the point, proving the concept. But on that machine, I have my production network, which is sat on TPM03-741 on a distributed virtual switch in a different environment elsewhere. And I have an isolated network that we're creating here called Virtual Lab 1 VM. And it's on a VLAN ID of 740. But that same machine has an iSCSI LUN presented to it over that network. So TPM03-705 iSCSI. And I'm also creating another network inside of that isolated network. And I'll show you what that looks like in vSphere. And we're calling that one just iSCSI. I don't need that to actually be able to see any of the data. But we could, in theory, use our storage device and present maybe a snapshot, a clone of a LUN back into this system if we wanted. So just looking here, again, we go and browse. Now you can see that I've got two vSphere environments. I've got this VCO3, which is where all of those, that's where my production systems are all running. And then I have my very simple environment, which really doesn't consist of much at all. It has our vSwitch 0, which is where our VM network lives, which is where the production would be for that secondary site or test and dev environment. But what I need to do is I need to make sure that that new environment is aware that machine coming in from the backup is going to think that it's got a network adapter on TPM 03-740-1. So I either go and select it on that vSphere environment, or I could just type that in if I knew that. Now, if you're going to do this at scale, then you're probably going to want to go and select it or even script this. But this is a one-time operation as well. The creating of a virtual lab, they live there for as long as they're needed, as well as the application group. So once they're created, you can obviously modify them, you can change them, but once they're done, and you just leverage them for the continuation. I also know that this is a VLAN ID of 740, so I want that to carry over. And then in the isolated VM network, I want it to be that isolated network. Now, if we were just coming in here for the first time, you could name that whatever you wanted. It would come up with something similar to Virtual Lab 1, the name of the virtual lab that you defined at the very beginning of the wizard, and then it would use the isolated network or a copy of the isolated network for that. So initially this would have been production network VM network, and then I changed it to Virtual Lab 1 VM network. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Same thing happened in here. So again, I went browse, I went down, I found my 705, I used that, and then I created, or I typed in there whatever you want really, just something that enables you to see what that port group is actually for and what's going to land in there. And obviously this could have network mappings all the way down depending on what virtual machines you're bringing in. So if I was bringing in something from 720.1 or 710, I might bring them all in here, and I can have multiple port groups to be able to manage that in our target environment. Now, what are the network settings for the isolated network? So if you think up until this point, we're now talking about the production and how that virtual machine backup is going to land into our isolated environment and what network it needs to match to in the target environment. Now, if we get to network settings, now think about those virtual machines. So that virtual machine has been booted up. It's been assigned the correct network. It's been linked or mapped with those isolated networks. And then from there, we need to actually say, well, what does that mean? How does the proxy deal with that network? So generally, again, you're going to have just one here, and you add in your additional NICs as you need them. And this will, again, when you go into that virtual lab proxy appliance, when you see it, because we automate the deployment of that, you're going to see that it's got those two NICs assigned to it. So again, we choose our isolated network to connect to this VNIC. We then need to define whatever our production VM default gateway is what needs to happen here. So that in the production environment, so that's 740-1 network, my default gateway is 10.0.40.1 with a subnet of class C subnet 24/24. And then this masquerading network is, well, how do I get access from the production network into my isolated network? Now, not necessarily applicable to SureBackup. Yeah, Craig, just seen your comment about white screening, light screening, that network layout. So for those that were on the call last week, there was a diagram, an architecture diagram that we actually went out in and did this. The only thing different is that iSCSI network is not applicable. But hopefully that's, either refer back to it, or we might have time at the end to be able to write something up. So this masquerade network address is purely there so that either the VBR server, or we'll get to static mappings next, is so that we have something to allow us to go through the proxy appliance and into our machine. So you notice that the last octet here is empty because we're going to take the same octet of the machine that you had in the production. So for example, the VM that I'm using in this application group is 10.0.40.1 10.101. So if I want to access that while it's in the sandbox environment, then I would go to 10.255.254.101 and I would be able to ping it, which we'll see that later. And then also I would be able to access that. If it's a web server, I could go to the web page. I could actually see the web server as it was at that point in the backup and now you start to see how a web developer could jump on that, change the theme, see what it looks like before they potentially put that update into production. But I've put it in there because this virtual lab might be for verifying the backup and how good it is, but we also might use that virtual lab for that sandbox environment as well, so they can be used by multiple use cases as well. I also added in the DNS for that as well. If I had dependencies where I'm also going to take my domain controller backup and I'm going to throw that into my application group, I might use that, and that's where that comes in as well. Same thing for the iSCSI interface. Again, I give it a default gateway. Again, you don't really need to do that. This is iSCSI as well, so it doesn't need a default gateway. Generally speaking, it will not have a default gateway. And I'm not going to access it on there, but just this really... So the difference is, if I didn't have this, I would have a warning in the SureBackup job that I ran. Just a warning. It would still successfully test the backup and make sure it's all good, but there's a warning in there. So that's why I've gone ahead and I've created this dummy network that is not actually going to be used. Now, for those again that remember the architecture diagram that I showed in the slides last week around the potential laptop or the SSH RDP access into the virtual lab, this is where you can define that isolated IP. So in our instance, it's going to be that 10.255.254.101. We're going to say the access IP, which is going to be the IP address of the production VM. So that'll be a 10.0.40.xyz. And then we could put some notes against that. And you might have a whole developer team that we want accessing that. Or we might just leave it as, I only want VBR to be able to access that because I'm just going to do SureBackup and verify that it's all good. And that's it. It's going to give you the summary of what it's going to do. And then from there, if we jump over to application groups, and let's take application group 1. This is super simple. And this is really about grouping some application servers together as one construct for us to use. So again, give it a name, probably a bit more meaningful than application group 1. And then we're going to choose our virtual machines. Now the important bit here is that these can be from backups, which is generally where you're going to run your SureBackups. SureBackup is really about verifying that your backups are in a good state. Now you could run SureBackup against storage snapshots if you really want to make sure the snapshots are containing exactly a running virtual machine, but they probably are on an hourly schedule. So it's up to you whether you want to go that extreme and understand that. It's possible. And then we have SureReplica that you may or may not have heard of. Is ultimately it's the same process, but again we're doing it off the replica that sits in the secondary location. Same isolated environment, same virtual lab requirements. Everything over there is exactly the same, but we're going to spin it up, test it against the VM, the app, and the OS, and then a report gets sent out. Again, we'll get on to what that means. If this was for Sandbox, and maybe we do one for, the on-demand Sandbox as well later on, another live stream, and that's about being able to keep these up and running, so that people could actually dive in and do something with that data. It's not just verification; it's actually leveraging that data. So if we go in here and we go edit, then we have some select roles. Now this is interesting. So generally speaking, there's one in here that is custom, but these are out of the box apart from that one custom one. And what these do is test against the VM that you've assigned it to and test against the port that is opened. So I'll choose web server for example. It's going to be tested. It's going to run a specific test against port 80 of the VM IP address. Simple as that. It might be that it's tested against a specific Veeam backup for Microsoft Office 365 port, SQL port, mail server, potentially. All of those are options, and you assign those to your virtual machines. Then you get into startup options. So, and I'll touch on how this can be done as well. So anything that you want to test against those. Craig, good question around VBO 365. No, this has been in there. I want to say version 10, but it could have even been 9.5 update 4. So if you wanted to make your own custom port tests or be able to modify these, this might be the test. There we go. Let's just do open file location. So where you're going to find this is under C, program files, Veeam, backup and replication, backup and SB roles. And what you do is you could open an existing one, take this, change your name here, obviously save it as something different to web server, potentially change the characteristics of that. So you'll have to also change this ID needs to be unique across all of the other options. And what this is going to do is enable you to run those tests. So if we go into here, this Veezilla custom looks exactly the same, just a completely different ID, different name. And then when you save that back in with admin privileges back into there, and you reopen this, that Veezilla custom will appear. So it's an XML format. You get the idea. There's some really good community-driven XML scripts out there on the Veeam forums. So then we get into the startup options. So I mentioned last week about resources. Biggest resource, yes, it's going to be CPU, but those that have been around virtualization for a long time, maybe even a short time, know that memory is the key part to or generally the key part to our resources. So we have the ability to choose what percentage of that memory of the production system we want to use when it comes to spinning this up. Now, most people might go, oh, I'm constrained by the amount of memory that I have within my system. I might have enough CPU, but memory, I'm really constrained. So I need to knock that down to 50%, or I need to knock that down to 75%. Or if you're running a sandbox environment, you can actually go up. You can say, let's say that this has got let's say there's 8 gig of RAM in this machine, but let's say actually we're running some performance tests. I want to see how it runs with 16 or even 32 gig, and we've got the resources to be able to do that in our wherever that target environment is. You can knock that up to 200%, and that will then give that machine more than the production system, so that you can do some performance testing to see if it's actually beneficial before you load that new bit of memory into the production machine, and so on. Then we get into startup time. So how long does it take? How long are we going to allow this machine to take to boot up? So generally, I think this is maybe 3,000 to begin with, which you all know, like, I don't want to be sat there for 10 minutes. Even if it's finished, I don't want to be sat there for 10 minutes waiting for this to happen. So I generally look at the best possible seconds to bring that down to, so I can make my demos as streamlined as possible. Just checking chat. And then you've got the application initialization. So if this is an app server, you probably want to give it enough time, especially if it's Exchange or SQL, if you're still running Exchange on premises, that is. But you want to make sure that that's got enough time to be able to boot up. This is a web server, so 120 seconds is more than enough, really, especially on a Linux box. Then we start to get into boot verification, so things like VM Heartbeat, which is going to use VMware tools, and then you've got VM Response to Ping, which is obviously a network test that we're going to run from the VBR server. So that kind of goes back to why we don't need to create that static mapping for the VBR server. It's already built into that virtual lab proxy appliance. You're always going to be able to communicate to the isolated environment from your VBR server. So then you've got test scripts. So we've gone through what those roles look like, but you could also go in here and you can use a predefined script, a script of your own that you want to test yourself. And then throw some credentials in there. Obviously, if you're going to want to inject a process into that machine, you need to be able to have access into that system. So that's kind of a long way of talking about the application group, but generally speaking, it's a case of going add, pick where it's coming from, backup, replica, storage snapshot, knock them all in, and then send a test. Now, the important thing to note is that they can be mixed as well. So you could have backups and storage snapshots together, depending on what the use case it is. Again, probably more fitting towards the sandbox environments. Again, I touched on if you've got a DBA wanting to run some performance testing against their production SQL Oracle box, they should have the data on the storage snapshot as opposed to the backup, if it's obviously possible, because performance testing against a backup repository is not going to be the same as what it is in production. Okay, so at that point, if we go and jump over to the vSAN environment, or sorry, the vSphere environment that I'm using, you see that I've created, or it's automated the creation of a resource pool called Virtual Lab 1. Virtual Lab 1 this is the Proxy Appliance. Distributed Lab. We're gonna go into that also later. And then also under here, you should have folders called Distributed Lab, Virtual Lab. Pretty simple stuff. If we go and look at the networking, same premise. We've created that with our Virtual Lab, so we automate the creation. You don't need to. So Virtual Lab 1 VM network is created. iSCSI network is created off the back of the configuration that we put into the job. And again, we'll get into this quickly later on. So at that point, we're ready to go and create our SureBackup job. So under here, we've got, again, probably call it something else later on, or something more meaningful again. So again, pretty simple stuff. We've done the hard work. We've created the virtual lab. We've created the application group. We've got our head around the networking configuration of the virtual lab, hopefully. So we're going to give it a name. We're then going to choose the virtual lab that we want to use for this specific use case, for this actual running job. So the virtual lab that we're going to use is going to be that virtual lab 1, but you can see that the tick, or I can choose the other 2 that were there. And then it gives you the information of what is the host that is on, what's the total VMs, what's the data store, what's the free space. So at a glance, you can already see whether you're constrained, at least from a storage point of view, and what else is running on there. Then we choose our application group. Again, you probably saw 2 in there. So here we just confirm, yep, that's the CentOS. Now, if we wanted this to continue and not automate the power up, power down, the power down's the important bit, then we tick this box here and it will keep everything running so that then you can give access to people to come in and they can do their thing and make any changes that they need to in there. Then we can also link jobs to it. So if we wanted to link it to a specific backup job that maybe there was some workers in there or something specific that we needed, maybe a domain controller again, all virtual machines from the selected backup jobs will be processed sequentially once the specified application group is initialized. So what that's going to do is it's going to take all of the backups from that job that we're linking, and it's going to take all of those and spin them up as part of the same process. For the simplicity, I'm not running that. You can see there's a few advanced tips on there as well that you can do in terms of performance on getting that data or getting that workload up and running. Then under settings, you've got an integrity check that you can perform if you wish. So it's going to go deeper. It's going to basically do a health check against the virtual disk and its contents. And then you're going to do another new feature that was 9.5 update 4 was secure restore, but the same functionality is here in SureBackup, which allows you to scan the selected restore point for any malicious activity. So by ticking that, yes, it's going to take a little bit longer, but it's going to test against one of the antivirus softwares, and it's going to make sure that there's no malware in there against the latest definitions. So that's that's an option in here as well as, and again, we'll do a live stream on just secure restore, and we'll touch on that a little bit more in there. Then if we want to schedule it, now people will either schedule this on a weekly, daily, monthly type, a daily or monthly time frame, but I actually like doing it after the job. So once the job is complete, take the latest restore point, and I want to make sure that that's good so that we complete everything in the same backup window. We're not going back to it 2 hours, 3 hours later. Let's just do it straight away. Purely and simple that it's a time thing. But again, some customers won't schedule it, and it will just be an ad hoc way of being able to run that. So, okay. So we can run this and just show you what it looks like within vSphere as well, and what else you can do in here. So what this is going to do is going to initially, and hopefully I can sort out the screen. So on the left hand side you'll see vSphere, and you'll see that we're powering on that virtual lab proxy appliance. In fact, what I need to do is I need to open this, and first of all I'm going to show you what it looks like. So the proxy appliance, I gave an address of 165, I hope. Okay, so now we know that our proxy appliance is up. And you can see that it's powered up there. So then let's set up another ping now to, I think it was 255.254.101. And let's see what that looks like eventually. So destination host not accessible. It'd help if I worked out these. You can see now that we're starting to publish, and when I've got this into a place where we can see it all in one screen. So, and there you go. So now you see that CentOS box is being presented. So if we go down into the data stores, so the relevant piece here is that we're taking the backup file of this virtual machine and we are presenting it over NFS to the vSphere environment. Also note that I didn't take this backup from this vSphere environment, which is why we had to do that configuration change within the virtual lab. But ultimately, this data store is the backup file on the Veeam repository. Okay, so things are booting up, things are powering on, and then you've got that 300 seconds to wait. And as if by magic, as if I've done this 100 times before, that the powering on, and you start to then see the ping request for that machine with inside of that environment is now pinging back. But if I go into this machine and I ping that same IP address, so a production system, I should not be able to get in because I didn't make that a static mapping. So VBR by default, yes, you're allowed to do this. If we wanted this machine on the left-hand side to be able to communicate and maybe do something within there, then we would need to have that static mapping from this machine's IP address, production IP address, into that system. So powering on, again, we're just winding through that 300 seconds. Even though IP address is up, it's running its tests. It's going to run that heartbeat test. It's, in fact, another useful thing is being able to click on this and be able to walk through the steps in which it's taken. So we can say we're going to publish, and you can start to see backup repository is this. It's scale up backup repository 1. The virtual resources that we're going to present it to is going to be 161. So one of the hosts. So remember, we're constrained to that one host. Then we're going to give it the maximum boot time, the network adapter address, all of that good stuff, all of the stuff that's taken from the VMX file, and we're going to reconfigure it. So that's where we could have potentially given it 8 gig of RAM rather than just the 4 that it has. You can see that the network is also now mapped. So the 740 that is now isolated virtual lab network 1. We've tested everything, we've registered it, we've powered it on, we're waiting for the OS to boot. So we've found that we've found the iSCSI address as well. If we wanted to, we could ultimately get into there as well and use that. We've seen that the heartbeat is good. We've seen that the ping is good. There's the ping. Now the application, this is where we're going to run that test against the port 80 and make sure that the web server is up and running. If this was a sandbox environment, I could open up a web browser. I'm pretty sure it won't work because I'll miss the gap to be able to do it on here. But we'll do an on-demand sandbox if that's what people want to see as well. Yeah, Craig, you're absolutely spot on. Good tip for proving to developers that they don't need 16 vCPUs or 128 gig of RAM or a whole ESXi host for one database server. Now, it could go the other way. It could prove that they do, but I'd rather an infrastructure guy and a DBA actually just talk and let each other work out together the best practice for their stuff. So this is then going to run through. It's running that script. Again, it's generally set to the 2-minute mark. It's probably finished already. It's a simple port 80 test. We've skipped the antivirus because that obviously takes a much longer because it's going to scan the whole entire disk. So you can see as well, all the way through this, it's telling you the operation will be continued at 1:11 p.m. And we should see that any second now. And then the important thing here is that, okay, we've watched this, but then you get into the automated destroy of this as well. So we dismount, or we get rid of that CentOS box, remove from inventory. We then power down the virtual lab, and we're back to where we need to be. And yes, you can absolutely do this to your production environment. You can do this to your test and dev environment, even your secondary remote site. But you can see now that in however long that's taken, it's all done. Everything's been turned off. If I hit close now and I go to report, we've also got the ability to, so you will see this as an email. This can be emailed to you. So there's a big thumbs up to say this is all good. It also tells me what's happened. So if this was automated, let's just make this full screen again. So you can see here, this is because I hadn't configured the iSCSI network correctly. So if you don't have it at all, you get a warning because everything still works. If you configure it and it's wrong, then you're going to get an error. So it might still run and do everything you want, but you're going to get an error at that point. And I'll try and show you a warning shot as well, if there is one. So it's the reconfiguring really is where the warning comes in, because you can't ping anything on that address. Whereas if I'd have pinged that 10.255.blah.blah.iSCSI address, then we would have got a response back from the VBR server as well. Okay, so quickly to touch on the virtual lab and the distributed virtual lab. So if we go in here, looks and feels exactly the same until you get down to that networking piece. As soon as you click that, then you get the option to then go and choose your distributed virtual switch. So I've only got one. I created it. You saw it probably in the last bit of the demo. Then this should look very familiar in that we're now going to use this distributed switch, but the production network is 741. Distributed lab is obviously in fact, let's do this. Distributed lab VM. So now if we go and jump back into our vSphere environment, under networking, we created something called distributed lab VM network, and we created one called iSCSI. So the difference here is that now I don't care where that machine gets spun up. Or actually, I don't care where this virtual lab resides. I think if I go back and look, so that virtual lab was definitely deployed on 161. You can see now it lives on 173. But it kind of doesn't matter. And if we go back up to host, we definitely deployed it on 161. but it's now living on 173. So you could clearly go in there and you can migrate that. DRS might take over that. If you don't want DRS to do it, then it's on you and vSphere administrators to make sure it doesn't move. But in the distributed world, it also doesn't matter. So again, we go through that. The network settings, again, look the same, apart from I'm using 253 here, not 254. If I wanted to use 254, Veeam knows that another virtual lab already exists with that. Now, if you're only running one at a time, then it doesn't matter too much. The other thing is on here, my virtual labs all have the same IP address, just so that I'm aware that when I go to ping, I'm not going, oh, what's that IP address? And I have to come back in here. If I use 165, I'm generally only using one proxy appliance at a time. So yeah, that's ultimately why I use the same IP address. Might different for different environments. Again, it's a choice. Static mapping, again, we could add in that laptop or the developer type system and are ready to apply. Now, where before we were constrained to just that 161 host, where already you've seen that the virtual lab is running on a different one. Now this generally takes about 5 minutes to run, so we'll kick it off, and whilst that's running, if there's any questions that I might have missed up the stream. So, well, there's still people here, so that's a good start. I haven't bored anyone to death with this. Yeah, if there's any questions, then just drop it in the chat below, and we'll answer them. I see what you mean, Craig, as well. I can see myself on the stream. I look massively overexposed. It looks very light. I'll have to fix that. Although you didn't come here to see me. So this time round, I will leave it clicked onto that VM status. So again, another interesting point here is that once this is actually presented, this becomes a hyperlink and allows you to use the vSphere remote management. So you could then jump into that from here. So if you're just making sure you just want to go in there and check, then you can do that as well. That's an interesting point there. So I'm using the CentOS box purely and simply. It's a very tiny machine, little web server. We can't run an antivirus scan because generally speaking, our virus scan is against or using Windows-based agents or Windows-based antivirus. And plus, when does Linux get viruses anyway? Same as Mac. I'll leave it at that. Tongue in cheek. Question from Craig around in the custom test XML, does the test need specific exit codes? Good question. I didn't think it did. No. So it's going to test that. There's a timeout though on it. That's twice that's happened. It's to do with that 120 seconds of the application initialization is my understanding. So basically the exit code's there for you. So it will take that 120 seconds to make sure that argument is already ran before it fails, warns, or so the exit code's built into the logic already. But I've not seen anyone else put anything else into here. And I guess maybe that's a challenge that I'd set. So this is version 10. I'm not running anything new here. I don't believe any of these have needed anything more. Like if we go and look at global catalog, again, they're all port-based tests. So that's where I was going, is about I don't know if you can run another argument. So, for example, can I see if a specific Windows service or a service is running within that system? If I can test for the port, potentially I could test for the service as well. Might be one for the forums there as well, Craig. So you can see as well. Oh, sorry, I had that over the top. But again, this is happening. If we go and jump while that's doing it, you can see that this is running. But hopefully, typically they're running on the same host. Okay, just for in the testing before, believe me that was running on a different host, and it's just conveniently now not running on that. Because in theory, though, that could run on either of the hosts. Ah, no. So it says 161. So is my vSphere just being a pain? Yeah, nothing's changing. This is a nested environment as well, so there's not actually 3 hosts that are sat there doing nothing. Yeah, this is just a nested environment, but that looks to me like something's going on with my vSphere environment. Good stuff. Nothing like a live demo. But in theory, if I jump into here, we're running the scripts, so we're going to confirm that it is actually a web server. Maybe I killed it. No, there we go. Ah, so it's already pulled it down. Typical. So you can see then that it deletes that write cache as well that we had presented, where we were using that vSAN as part of the virtual lab. As part of the SureBackup job or the virtual lab. You can see that now it's turned off everything, and yeah, hopefully, like all in all, I understand that the networking side of things is the most confusing part of SureBackup. The idea of it is obviously great. People want to test their backups, but maybe that configuration point is the difficult part. So, but yeah, if there's any questions, I'll stick around for another 2 or 3 minutes. But yeah, in the comments down below as well, for those that are picking this up as the recording, any questions on any of these areas, like, let me know in the comments. I've written white papers on this there's 4 that break down the whole of that Veeam Data Labs piece. I'll try and dig the links out for that as well. I think I actually did a blog post consolidating all of them. So, but hopefully that was useful. I think next week, unless I get a resounding don't do that from the live chat right now, I think we'll cover Secure Restore, just on what it is and how it works and where to find it. I think that's the most interesting part about Secure Restore, is that it's obviously there for a number of restore activities, but you'd be surprised as to where it pops up, like in SureBackup jobs and potentially in other areas. But yeah, any questions? Was it useful? Did that give you a bit more insight into virtual labs, or answer some questions that you might have had? I know, Jim, you're on the live chat, or at least I think I saw you pop in. Did you learn anything? Because I know that you stick your head in the sand for SureBackup and Veeam Data Labs as a fan, not hiding away. As a fan, you try and get deep into it. I see what you mean, Craig. On the recording, when I look at the camera, my eyes go black. I look like a robot. Interesting that it doesn't come through on my OBS. Weird. Cool. Sounds good. If there's anything else, any comments, any other parts of Veeam Data Labs that we should add on to the next bit of the schedule? Doesn't look like there's anything against talking about Secure Restore next week. Hopefully everyone can come back. It's good just to sit, just for a bit of feedback, but also to make sure that my my novice streaming and my setup is actually working. Should try and figure out the eyes situation. Cool. Well, thanks everyone, and yeah, hopefully I'll just testing my eyes again there. That looks better. I just turned something down. Yeah, there you go. You can actually see my eyes. Cool. Nice one. Thanks for joining for the live chat. Really useful. Thank you very much. And for those watching the recording, yeah, please comment down below all of that good stuff that everyone always says on all of their YouTube videos. But yeah, hopefully that was useful. Cheers all.